Hi there. First of all, I just want to say welcome back to Cue Ball Garage. If you're coming back again or if you've just stumbled onto the channel, I'd like to welcome you aboard. Now last week when I finished off, I was talking about compression ratios and how we can work that out. So I guess the reason why compression ratio is so important is you need to plan your build out. So whether you go to an engine builder, you need to go to him or her with all the specs that you want. You need to know the end game of your vehicle. For example, is it going to be a street car only, street and strip, or an events car? And you need to be able to work out what type of fuels are going to be available to you. So if you're just running 98 fuel, there's nothing wrong with that, your compression ratio is going to have to suit. For example, some people live in remote areas and they won't have access to E85, for example. They could run a higher compression ratio, but you need E85 to stop detonation. Or if you're building a burnout car or something and you've got access to methanol, well, you're going to build a big boy, aren't you? Big compression ratio, blower hanging out of the bonnet, all that kind of thing. So this is why it's important to know your build. So for people who want to have a go at building an engine, or you've got the know-how and you just want to know the ins and outs of it, I don't want to bore everyone, but I think it's very important that you know the basics and you know why you're heading down the path you're heading. So really at home we're just engine assemblers. To me, an engine builder is someone who does all the measurements, makes sure that all the clearances are right, and that engine is going to live for the purpose that it's built for. So I'm just going to bring in and show you what I was talking about last week. The crankshaft's already in there. This engine is dirty. The bores have been wiped, but this is just for just mock-up purposes only at the moment before I clean it up. So some of the things we need, the crankshaft's in, there's only a couple of caps on it just to keep it in place. And then I've got a piston out of the box. We are going to use a piston in number 1 cylinder. That's just the easiest way to do it. So we've got a conrod here, bearing in, and a bearing in the cap. I'm sure you know how to do that. The tangs line up and go into the cap like that. You can't mess it up. The thing that we need to remember is a conrod goes into the bore. So number 1 cylinder is the most forward cylinder on a Chevy. I've told you that. Now you can see that chamfer in the conrod. So on the left, it's got a chamfer on it. On the right hand side, it's got a slight chamfer. So that chamfer there touches up against the other rod. So if you can imagine, number 1 goes in with a chamfer towards the front. And then the other cylinder was actually number 2. So that chamfer on this side will go this way, and the 2 flat surfaces meet up in the middle, if you know what I'm saying. So the other thing we need to remember when we're putting the piston in, so these pistons have got quite a large dome, and you need to remember which way the cylinder head is going to go on. So that's the chamber. So obviously the way it's going to sit is the larger portion is going to sit in the chamber like that. Right, so I've just sat you back up there so I can work with both hands and then show you what's going on. So the piston is going to go in the bore like so. So that's going to be down the bottom, so when the head sits on, that's it, that's the way it has to go. We already spoke about the conrod with the chamfer going forward like that. So we know it's going in that way, that's going down that way. So we can just sit it in and slide the pin in, gudgeon pin, piston pin, whatever you want to call it. Now I've put a couple of wraps of masking tape around the ringland. So all that does, there's obviously no rings in it, there's no need at the moment. Stops the piston rocking in the bore so we can get a good effective measurement, and it's going to be accurate. Just making sure, chamfer at the front, we'll just pop it in, careful not to scratch anything. And as it comes down, you just reach your hand up and guide it on to the crankshaft there. Put a little bit of oil on the bearing. 2 bolts. And once again, these don't need to be super tight. It's just to stop it rocking in the bore. I'll just turn the engine over this way. Now I'm going to drop it on the floor. Just make sure that your chamfer goes the right way. And once we've got the bolts in a couple of threads, you can always turn the crank over and then get them in the position you need. All right, that's not going anywhere there. Got my tools ready. Snip those up. And that's all it has to be. So when we turn the engine over, so the most accurate way, so we see the piston come, we'll go direction of rotation, so we'll go clockwise. As the piston comes up, it comes to the very top of the travel, and there's a dwell angle before it starts to go back down. So whatever that piston's stationary at the top, that's called top dead centre. So the most accurate way to make sure you're at top dead centre would be with a degree wheel or with a harmonic balancer on, and it'll have the degrees stamped on it or a sticker on it. And you can just go back and forth and find out. Or you can have a dial gauge on the top of the piston, and when it stops, you'll know that's it, zero it, and then go rock back and forth until you get your true zero. But for today's exercise, we're going to say that's top dead centre. And what I've got here is a depth gauge. Now, a true machinist will cringe at these because digital gauges, no good. So what you do is sit that on there, zero it. Try and get the sweet spot. So you could say that's 6 thou. 6 thousandths of an inch. So 6 thousandths of an inch. I've checked it a few times. I think I might have hit the tape there, but I got 2 thousandths when I've checked a couple of times previously. Just moved it down here a bit. The piston doesn't rock because the tape's in there, like I said. So some of these tools we use to measure, I'm going to show you over here. So what we have is a dial bore gauge. It's got a dial indicator on top, obviously a shaft which joins up down to the bottom. And when that is squeezed in, so for example, as you're sitting it in the bore, like such, the needle moves, and you can set your micrometer first of all. So for example, I know that the bore on this particular block here is 4.125. We're talking in inches. So I would zero my micrometer at that, which then I would adjust my dial bore gauge to that as well. And then when I put it back into the bore, that'll give me in thou the clearance between the piston and the cylinder wall. That's how we work that out. And the similar way is done for checking out your main and rod bearing clearances. So you would measure the crankshaft. So you measure the pin down there, and also you measure the crank, the main journal, before you put it back in. put your bearings in the actual block and then do a measurement with the dial ball gauge. Now if you haven't got a dial ball gauge, you can use these. These are telescopic. So if you undo it, they come out like that, and then you can squeeze them in. Tighten that up and they'll stay. So the telescopic gauges, they're good if you haven't got a dial ball gauge. There's all different sizes, and then once they're locked up, you can measure those with your outside micrometer. There's another little outside micrometer there just for smaller parts. And then this one here, that's a little 4-inch zeroing scale there. And then it's got all the different extensions, so we can take it right out. So these extensions go on, and you can pretty much measure most bore sizes that I'll ever use. And then for not so, well, they are accurate, but not so accurate. So vernier calipers, very important as well, and they'll give you a rough size. If you go and buy an engine block and the guy tells you it's a standard bore, you know, it's a 350 Chev, so you're looking for 4 inches, take that out, that'll give you a rough indication that he's telling you the truth. So that's some measuring tools. Now I spoke last week about the cylinder head and the combustion chamber size. So the advertised size to what you actually have may be different, and if your heads have been machined, then that combustion chamber size will be less than what the advertised value is. So I mentioned it last week, but the best thing to do is to get your head level, so make sure it's level both ways. You're going to want to put a spark plug in, and that brings me to another thing about spark plugs. So these are both for the big block Chev, so thread size is the same, but have a look at the difference in the reach. So if I put this little shorty plug in, which are good to clear headers and you don't burn plug leads and all the rest of it, it only comes to probably 3/4 of the thread, or halfway out the thread. All right, you can see that there. Look how much thread we got left. So sure, that will work, but it's not ideal. You want your electrode to come right out to the edge. So this plug, so we can get it started. That's more like it. Once again, with anything, you need to rotate your engine over, make sure you got nothing hitting. So to work out your chamber volume, make sure it's level like I said. If they're brand new, you shouldn't have any issues with your valve seat sealing up. So the most accurate way to do it would be to put some Vaseline around the edge of the combustion chamber, put some clear Perspex on it with a hole in it, and then just use a syringe, like, you know, a Nurofen syringe or something for your kids' pain medicine, and just put it in. This is measured in cc's, and then that'll give you how many cc's it is. So these are advertised as 120, but with the plug in, it's 115. And you need that when you're working out your compression ratio, like I said. I feel like I've said compression ratio 1,000 times, but that's what we're doing. Another important thing in your compression ratio calculation is the bore of your head gasket. So these head gaskets are called MLS, or multi-layered steel, as you can see. Now NASCAR use them, so why shouldn't we? So these are Kinetic brand, these ones, and we need to figure out the bore. So if we have a look down here, I don't know if you can see that, but you have to take my word for it. So it's big block Chev generation 4, 60 thou is the compressed thickness, and the bore of that gasket is 4.320. That's in inches, obviously. So let's go over to my little chart that I prepared earlier. So we have a look. So you can see compression ratio calculators online,
And these are some of the things they're going to ask you. So cylinders, we've got 8 cylinders. Bore diameter is 4.290. Stroke is 4.250. Head gasket thickness is 60 thou, like we just saw. And with these MLS head gaskets, Cometic recommends that you go at least 30 thou, 30 to 60 thou, larger than your actual bore of the engine. And as you might imagine, being multi-layered steel, you might have a localised hotspot. If that's too close to the bore and you're into it, you might get heating of that thin metal gasket. So 30 thou will give you enough quench area and keep you away. That'll keep it cool. So 4.320, that gives us our 30. Deck clearance, we said before, we got 6 thou when I measured it on camera, but a couple of times off camera I got 2 thou. So that's what I put in there. Combustion chamber volume, 115 cc's. Piston dome volume is actually 38 cc's. So you might be looking and going, why is it minus 38? Because it's such a large dome, shouldn't it be positive? But what we need to figure out is that dome actually goes in and it takes away from the combustion chamber volume. So it's filling up that volume. So minus 38 cc's. So that'll be 38 cc's above the deck height. So it brings up, when you have a look on the calculator, it comes up 492 cubic inches. So it's 40 thou over, because I know that the bore diameter of a big block Chev is normally 4.250, and I'm 40 thou over, so 4.290. The normal stroke is 4 inch, and I know I'm a 1/4 inch more on the stroke, so this is called a stroker combination. So 492 cubic inches is what it comes out to, and 11.95 to 1, which is very healthy. And a lot of people must be saying, you must be crazy, man, you ought to be medicated. But that's going to be fine. So then, once we've worked out our compression ratio, then we go to our dynamic compression ratio. So what this takes into account is the cylinder pressure. And if we have a look there, intake valve closing point. So we need the details from our camshaft we're going to run. So let's just say this is the one I'm going to run. So we have a look on the cam card that comes with the cam, gives you all the details. It's got 324 degrees. That's the closing point. So we put that in. Rod length, so being a stroker combination, the rod length, so 6.135 is the standard, and this rod length is 6.385. That's a stroker rod. Adjusted stroke, 3.968. So that brings our dynamic compression ratio to 11.22 to 1, which is fine with aluminium heads and running 98 octane. So I believe our brothers in the United States, they rate their fuel differently. So I think 93 octane will be equivalent to our 98. So that'll be fine. So when we talk about adjusted stroke, so what happens is with a stroker rod and piston combination, I'll open up this box now and have a look. So your standard piston, I'll open it up and get it out of the bag. So your standard piston will probably have a longer skirt on it. Well, it will have a longer skirt on it. And see where the gudgeon pin is, the hole is there. So, and that is where your oil control rings go. So what we have there is a support rail. So one of those support rails will go around there to support the bottom of the oil control rings. So if you imagine normally, that pin would be down here somewhere. But we can't do that with a stroker combination, because you can imagine as the crank is turning around, let me show you here. So you imagine as that rod comes up to here, keep on going. So you imagine, look at the counterweights of the crank there. You imagine if that piston was up here anymore. It can't be done. So that's why we need a shorter piston, so the skirt doesn't protrude past too much, and we don't have the piston hitting the counterweights of the crank. So that's why that pin is moved up. So we can still achieve what we need to without causing any clearance issues. hope that explains it. If there's any more questions, just hit me up in the comments and I'll try and answer whatever I can for you. So just remember, I'm not the be-all and end-all. I'm trying to let you guys know what I know, pass on my information. But there's more than one way to skin a cat. So just a bit more info. Hopefully I haven't bored you too much already, but so what we're actually doing when we work out a compression ratio is we're working out the swept volume of the cylinder, so which is the bore diameter, and the stroke, so how far the piston goes down inside the bore. And imagine with the cylinder head on, so as the piston comes back up, it is compressing all the air and fuel that's in that space, and it's compressing it all to fit inside that chamber there. So hence the compression ratio. It's compressing all that into that combustion chamber, and then at the right time the spark goes and then ignites it. Flame front travels down, the pressure's only got one way to go and it's pushing that piston back down the bore. So the higher compression ratio, without being too silly, is the better we can go. So the volumetric efficiency of the engine, and that's what's going to give us our horsepower. So horsepower is one number and everyone wants all of them, but you just need to know what your end game's going to be. So horsepower and torque, they're the two big numbers we need to know. So a couple of different types of engines. So a square engine would be where the bore is the same size as the stroke. Over square would be the bore is larger than the stroke. And then normally in a diesel, we'd have a smaller bore and a larger stroke. So a more torquier engine that doesn't rev as hard. So an over square engine is more likely to be, or it'd be better for higher revving applications. There you go, there's my 10 cents worth anyway. So a lot of people are probably looking at this block and going, what's going on here? Well, a mate of mine's got a HQ and he wants me to build an engine for him. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to start off with, so this is more or less a reproduction of a bow tie Chevy block, aluminium block. And they're only about 40 odd kilos. I can lift this bus up onto the bench myself. So aluminium construction, steel liners pressed in, so 4.125 bore. We're going to build a 4-inch stroke, so it'll be about 433 cubic inches in a small block combination, so it'll be pretty healthy, decent cubes and nice and light. So pretty nicely built block. This is what we go. So he actually lives down on the farm down near Goulburn. So I'll film the footage of us going through that, building that. So billet main caps, the centre ones are splayed, so probably that's the strongest way you can have them. Screw-in Welsh plugs. It's got no cam bearings in at the moment. I'll show all about the build, how to do that. Put the cam bearings in. We'll measure it up and do everything that I've spoken about today. All right, so that should be a fun build anyway. So I'll give you a quick insight in that. So a bit more info on engine builds. Just when you thought you were bored enough, we're going on. So I want to talk about cylinder heads and then the application that you want to use them for. So most people have a look at a cylinder head and they go, oh, it looks nice and shiny, how good's that? But what we need to figure out is when you buy your head, you get all the specs. So the intake runner in cc's, that'll tell you that. And also the exhaust runner volume as well. So what we're trying to work out here is how much this head will flow. So if there's not specs for your particular head, you can go online and once again, bit of a calculator there and it'll tell you roughly what would flow at what valve opening. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to whack the biggest cam in this thing that I can find. And although that is good, you need to have a look at your cam specs and figure out what kind of RPM range. So most of the time, so for example, there's a camshaft, I'm looking for this one, and it's got like 739 thou of lift. So that means at the valve, it'll be 739 thou down inside. Now that is pretty big lift and pretty healthy, but the only trouble is there, the power that you're making, so kind of like a power band you'd say. So it'll give you the specs and it'll tell you that from 4,200 RPM to 7,200 RPM is where it's going to be making its most power. So that's why you hear people say about running stall converters. They run like a turbo 400 or a strong transmission, and they'll run a stall converter at about 4,000 RPM. So that'd be similar to slipping the clutch to take off, but it's in an auto obviously. So that's how you take off from the line, and you're already more or less the power band of the engine. You're in the optimum range. So if you've got an engine that's going to be running like that, then we also have to have a bit of a look at the intake manifold. So the intake manifold is going to have to be able to handle it. So you wouldn't go a single plane, or you would go a single plane, sorry, you wouldn't go a dual plane manifold because you wouldn't get the benefit out of it. So you're going to need a big manifold that's going to be able to flow that air, and then you're going to get the maximum out of it. Also, big carby. So if you're going to be flowing that amount of air, anything that's going to be a restriction has to go. So just one final thing before I sign off, tell a quick joke. When you're setting up an engine and you want to rev the thing, give it a bit of a punishment. So you can buy standard bearings, but you can buy standard X, so standard with extra clearance. So you're looking at about 2.5 to 2.8 thou on your mains, and maybe up to 2.5 thou on your rod bearings. Most people run a high volume oil pump anyway. So the more clearance you got, to a certain extent, is better than having too tight a clearance, because you don't want to lock the thing up. You're going to give it a bit of punishment. That's what I always use, is the standard X bearings. But once again, you're going to be measuring your clearances to get them right. Now you can use plastic gauge if you like. All it does is make a mess really, so you're better off using the proper measuring tools and get it accurate. And do a little book, or in your notes on your phone or whatever, do a book and then write down all your clearances, all your specifications there, and then you can go back to it and check later on. And if it's a combination that works well, something you can use again down the track. That's what I use anyway. Now I've had a couple of inquiries. I've actually had a message from a guy over in WA, Mr. Sean Haywood. Oh, sorry, he didn't want his name mentioned. We'll just call him Sean H at the moment. That'll keep his identity. Anyway, he wrote me a bit of a message, and he just said, Brito, I just want to ask, have you lost a bet and you've had to shave your eyebrows off, or have you had a round of chemo? What's going on? And actually, I've had a couple of guys at work, their sons watch the channel and subscribe, and they've actually asked their fathers, what's going on, why has he got any eyebrows? So yeah, I suppose I better address it. I've actually got alopecia, so I've had it for a number of years. So good news, it's no real drama. It's just like an autoimmune disorder. Some people say I'm too tired or too lazy to grow hair. Well, yeah, maybe. So it's no real drama, but there's another couple of good Aussie legends who have got alopecia as well. So Dean Canto, V8 supercar driver, or former supercar driver. Peter Garrett, front man for Midnight Oil. He later went on to become a politician, but we won't hold that against him. And I'm sure that there's lots of other people around with alopecia as well. And most of the guys will be moderately well hung, funny, intelligent blokes just like me. So there we go, we've got rid of that drama, just to let you know. So we'll start with a bit of a joke, or finish with a bit of a joke. Anyway, so a nun has pre-ordered an Uber, locks the door, goes outside, jumps in the Uber on the way. And anyway, the Uber driver, after about 10 minutes, looks around at the nun and says, look, I feel a bit embarrassed to say it, but I've really wanted to kiss a nun. It's just been one of the things I've always wanted to do. So the nun thinks about it for a while and then says, okay, no worries. So the Uber driver pulls over, jumps in the back, latches onto the nun, starts kissing passionately. And after a couple of minutes, the nun says, right, that's enough. All right, that's enough. So the Uber driver gets out, jumps back in the front, turns around and says, look, I have to let you know that was one of the best experiences I've ever had. Just a fetish of mine, I've always done it. Now the nun goes, look, you told me that you were single and I hope that's the case. The Uber driver, he waits for a little while, he looks back sheepishly and says, look, I've actually lied to you. I need to come clear my conscience, and I've actually married with kids. And then the nun waits for a while and then after a couple of minutes says, look, now that we've both been honest with each other, I need to let you know something as well. The Uber driver goes, what's that? He goes, my name's Kevin and I'm on my way to a fancy dress party. All right, no worries. Thanks very much. Please like and subscribe and I'll see you next time. Thank you.